should be able to do it fast, and I should get the value quickly rather than spending hours and hours doing it. And that also becomes a hindrance because more often than not, your delivery and testing teams will tell, oh, I've got business capability to deliver, right? Now you're asking me to do chaos engineering, and that's more toil for me, right? And that's where, we talk about, one of the things that I picked up from one of my leaders in the past, he always said, work with empathy, right? So what does work with empathy have to do with chaos engineering? So I always tell my engineering teams, develop with empathy, thinking that you as a developer will be an operations person tomorrow. So are you going to write crappy code and make your operations life miserable, right? So the point is, if you have that empathy, you could start injecting failures early so that you could then give your operations team a better experience later on, right? There are so many times I've been to a movie theater, been called out, I've had to go back to the workplace. Many, many times, right? And I'm sure people in operations here would have experienced that too. You can't have one meaningful dinner with your family, right? Because your operations issues are killing you every day. So bring that in and reduce the toil while you do so, right? And lastly, the lack of follow through, right? Now, this is an interesting part. I've done a chaos engineering experiment. I found some issues. What's the follow through, right? Is the market or are organizations mature enough today to accept a chaos finding as a defect? High chances are no. Organizations are not thinking along those lines. One of the interesting recommendations one of our customers gave us, saying, why don't you convert it into a user story? Make it a requirement rather than a defect. People are more receptive in accepting it that way, right? It was a trick that actually worked, and that we got the feedback from our customer. So we positioned that. But the follow-through is essential, right? And your follow-through could be short-term actions, or some could be really long-term actions, because you could have a fundamental design flaw that you can't fix overnight, right? And to be honest, with some of the practical experiences that I've had, we found issues with vendor products, right? They didn't have proper session handling, and we found that through chaos. We kind of gave a feedback back to them, and they said, okay, we can add it to our roadmap, but it can only be delivered 6 to 12 months later. Now imagine, if your vendor says that it's going to take 12 months to deliver, you as a customer are living with a time bomb for 12 months, right? Because the problem can hit you anytime. So sometimes, ignorance is also bliss. If you don't know it, you're okay. But if you know it, but then at least you start thinking of mitigation, right? How could you deal with it? And that's where the whole concept of knowledge management, having the right recovery procedures, SOPs, comes into play, right? So hope I've given you a bit of perspective. Does this kind of resonate with you, some of these challenges in adoption, right? Okay. Now, moving further from there, what's the approach? So how do you distill it down, right? Now, typically 6-step approach, right? But if you go back to the rule book or the textbook, it says, if you know a weakness, fix it, right? Don't bother chaos, right? If you know a problem, go and do it, right? In many cases, you would see that, you've got a single point of failure in a database. So what's the point of chaos? You might as well fix it. But if you think you really want to get started, there is a very practical approach to it, right? And there's a science behind it. You always look at the architecture, right? And don't look at the architecture in silo. Look at the architecture from your business journey's point of view, right? So what's your critical path? So if you go back to that e-commerce journey, I said 3 steps, look at your entry point, look at your processing point, look at your downstream. If you look at this, only then you can start mapping what components you need to inject failures into, right? If you're able to do that, then think about the failures you can inject, right? Oh, I've got a Kafka here, so I'm going to kill the zookeeper, right? Oh, I've got an OpenSearch here. I'm going to inject a latency here to see how my data gets handled, right? I've got a Redis instance here. I'm going to actually kill it. Let's see what happens. So you can then start to distill it down and break it from a component by component perspective, right? And then you can play around with the parameters and so on. Now, number 4 is interesting. Choose target environment. Now, of course, Netflix philosophy was do it in production, right? But interestingly, Netflix never did it when they were on premise. They did it when they were migrating to AWS, right? Now, and their nature of business supports that. But I know many of you may be from the financial services industry. Can you dare to do a chaos test on your ATM system? You can just imagine the queues out there and the social media backlash. So pick your environment where you can do it, right? In most cases, I typically recommend to do it in the UAT environment, or if you've got a staging environment before getting into production, do it there. Why do you do it there, right? Of course, you can even do it at a unit test level, to be honest, but do it in a slightly mature environment because your business journeys traverse multiple systems. So, and if you've got your interfaces in place, test it there because that's where you're going to get the best bang for buck when you do this exercise, right? The other thing is you would have eliminated a lot of your functional issues till you get to your UAT stage, right? You will definitely still have defects, but the point is your code base is a lot more mature. So pick the environment that is closest to the production. Now, a lot of times people argue, oh, you know, my production environment is different, my UAT environment is different. But fundamentally, it's the same artifact that gets promoted into production. If your artifacts are different, then you've got an audit issue there, by the way, right? So it's the same artifact that gets promoted. So the point is you're at least testing against the code base that's going to run in production. Yes, your UAT or staging may not be built to the scale of production. You may not necessarily have the volumes there, but the point is your architecture is fairly identical. So you can still inject failures and learn from them. And I always recommend to run chaos in two scenarios. Run it at a functional level, against a functional level, and also run it at a performance level. Because if you're running a performance test and you inject chaos, your findings can be largely different as opposed to running one transaction at a time. So that would really, really help you, right? So that's number 5. So I hope I've kind of given you that. And last thing is find the weaknesses. But the point is don't find the weaknesses and stop. Have that follow through. If a design needs to be addressed, fix it. If it can't be fixed, get it into the roadmap. And you know, in many cases, yes, changing design requires dollars, right? You need budgets, and that can't happen. But I think that builds a strong case to take it to management and say, guys, we've got this problem. It's a ticking time bomb, right? Let's solve for this as early as we can, right? So that's the approach at a very high level. Now, interestingly, again, Matt was kind of showing various personas, right? Now, if you look at the personas, who can play an active role, right? A lot of times people say, oh, you know, SREs need to do it. But in some cases, people say, oh, SREs are ops people, but they don't have access to the UAT environment, right? It's not true. Fundamentally, architects, testers, app owners, in this case, I've intentionally used the word app owners and not developers, because every developer, in my opinion, is an app owner. As long as you contribute one line of code to your app, you're actually an app owner, because you have the accountability for that one line of code, right? So that's the reason I've kind of called it as app owner there. Now, architects, today what do? Today you define the requirements, you look at your blueprint approvals, you evaluate new technologies and so on. But how often do architects validate the architecture that's been implemented? Architects typically move from project to project, butterflies, right? But the point is, architect's responsibility does not end when they draw a blueprint and give it to you. Architect's responsibility actually never ends. It's the point that, you know, it's got to sustain in production, right? And technically, you can't walk away. I'm sorry if there are architects in this room, but your responsibility is as equal as to an ops person who's got to run it in production, right? Testers. So today, if you look at it, testers typically, you know, oh, I've got a business requirement, this is my test case or bunch of test cases, I'm going to look at a pass or a fail and walk away, right? Not good enough in today's context. Bring in the customer experience angle. If you can preempt your customer experience during testing, solve for the problems, trust me, your operations life would be a lot better. And the point is then your top line will grow because customer acquisition itself is hard, right? Losing customers is very easy. You could have 100 great features rolled out. You have one bad outage, good luck, right? So the point is, can you start preempting some of that early? If you can do that early, trust me, it can have tremendous exponential benefits to your organization. And lastly, developers, right? These are the guys who actually make or break, end of the day, right? You know, you write great code, fantastic. You write bad code, good luck. But the point is, even if you've written great code, it still needs to be tested. Tested for functionality, tested for reliability, right? So use chaos engineering as a tool. Shift left as early as you can. And trust me, it actually really works, right? So end of the day, I think I've kind of spoken a lot about this. What are the key outcomes that you would look to get, right? First things first, probably going from bottom to top, end user experience. No matter what happens in your IT landscape, right? This continuous state of transformation, your customer experience cannot be compromised, right? Think of the 99.xx in terms of successful requests, in terms of performant requests. If you're able to get to that, that's great. And end user experience doesn't end there, right? What kind of messages are you throwing back to a customer, right? Oh, I've got a latency somewhere, but I get a service not available, meaningless, right? Or maybe, you throw a 500 internal server error to your customer, meaningless. So preempt that customer experience, try to improve it, drive advanced development techniques, look at graceful degradation and all of that where possible, right? Strengthen system design, validate your architecture, eliminate single points of failure, eliminate single paths of failure, test your critical path through and through, look at your business journeys, make sure your business journeys are as resilient as they can be, right? Third thing is, use chaos engineering to improve your observability, right? When you inject a failure, what do you see in your logs? Is your monitoring able to capture that? Do you have the right thresholds? All of that contributes to your observability. And with improved observability, you can actually bring in improved incident response, right? Because if you had a failure, and one thing I'd like to call out, you could discover a lot of issues, but in many cases, you've got to live with certain issues that you may not have a resolution for those. So how do you deal with that? In that case, ensure you have the right SOPs where you've written, you've documented that knowledge saying that I've chaos tested, I found this problem, there's no fix for it, but this is how you recover from it. Trust me, your operations guys will love you, right? So these are some of the key outcomes that you could actually get. And trust me, right, the benefits of this that your business can achieve would be manifold, right? And bringing the whole sustainability angle to this is, imagine if you've got requests that can go first time right, you're actually avoiding retries. And with every retry, there is actually a compounding effect. And with that compounding effect, you're actually contributing negatively to the planet because your compute needs go higher. People tend to oversize their systems, saying that, I don't know what my capacity is going to look like. I've got 100 transactions per second, but I'm going to size it for 200, right? All that does not help, the environment positively, right? So find balance, and I will just conclude by saying that, reliability, in other words, alternatively security, alternatively sustainability, cannot be an afterthought. It's got to be a primary thought and integral to every aspect of your system delivery. If you can keep that in mind, we will all have good lives. So wishing you reliable systems, and thank you. Happy to take any questions, or we could always catch up in the break.